Dear friends, greetings for another episode of Now in the Military World. In this video, we will discuss the reasons behind the increasing pressure on Putin for a potential nuclear action in Ukraine and the elements at play in this complex situation. For many decades, the world has lived with the threat of nuclear conflict. In the decades between the 1960s and early 1980s, a nuclear war was considered almost inevitable, with major powers preparing in the best way possible. Fortunately, the Cold War came to an end without these devastating weapons being deployed, demonstrating that, despite political and ideological differences and tensions, common sense prevailed, and the planet escaped nuclear catastrophe. In the year 2022, the specter of a possible nuclear confrontation re-emerged as Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine. In response to this invasion, the United States and NATO acted in support of Ukrainian defensive forces, providing financial resources, weaponry, and ammunition. This not only halted the advance of Russian forces, but also enabled a counteroffensive that, between September and November 2022, led to the recapture of over 15,000 square kilometers of territory. In June 2023, the Ukrainians initiated another counteroffensive. However, unlike the first one, this is unfolding in a more gradual and costly manner. All this assistance coming from the United States, NATO, and other nations like Australia is clearly causing discomfort in Russia. If Ukraine were facing the war in isolation, it's likely that Putin would have achieved his objectives within a matter of weeks. However, now he's involved in a prolonged, intense, and costly conflict that's depleting Russian military resources and impacting Russia's ability to exert military influence in other regions of the globe, as seen in Syria. At this moment, the perception is that this war could extend for several years, during which both Russia and Ukraine will continue to suffer considerable losses in terms of military personnel daily. With Putin's resources dwindling every day, ammunition, vehicles, armored units, and troops, unless something unforeseen occurs, like a sudden halt in Western military support to Ukraine, the gradual attrition of Russian armed forces is likely to persist for a long period. Unless Putin is concealing a surprising strategy, such as the emergence of a new army composed of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, as well as a growing number of Russian officials and politicians, the only way to quickly end this war would be resorting to the use of nuclear weapons. When a nuclear-armed nation employs such weaponry against another nuclear nation, nuclear retaliation becomes practically inevitable. However, when a nuclear country attacks a non-nuclear nation, the outcomes are far less clear, remaining a subject of speculation and uncertainty. It's worth noting that most NATO member countries do not possess nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, according to alliance guidelines, a nuclear attack against one member is interpreted as an attack against all members, demanding a proportional response. Ukraine is not part of NATO or any military alliance that includes a nuclear state among its members. Consequently, if the country is targeted with a nuclear attack, it won't have the capacity to retaliate in a similar manner, either directly or indirectly. Within this context, considering a scenario where Russia carries out a nuclear attack against Ukraine, it's unlikely that the United States and other NATO members with nuclear arsenals would respond with a direct nuclear attack on Russia, as there isn't a strong legal basis for such action. Moreover, such retaliation could prompt a Russian response, potentially triggering a global nuclear war. The uncertainty regarding the consequences of a Russian nuclear attack on Ukraine has fueled a growing faction within Vladimir Putin's government advocating for the idea of nuclear strikes in Ukraine. This group argues that, given the fact that the West has already severed significant ties with Russia, the use of nuclear weapons, especially against Ukrainian military targets, would result in reinforcement of the already imposed sanctions. Under the leadership of former Russian President and Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, this faction believes that the worst possible response would be conventional attacks by the United States and other allies targeting Russian positions in Crimea and occupied Ukraine. Additionally, they anticipate a tightening of sanctions and possibly the cessation of diplomatic relations. According to this wing of the Russian government, the option of employing low-yield nuclear weapons, specifically against military targets such as bases and weapon and ammunition depots, becomes appealing. This could generate international outrage and condemnation, but would allow Russia to gain an effective edge in the conflict. Even while Putin is already facing broad criticism from many on the global stage, he could further strengthen his image, even if it means ending or at least freezing a conflict that is gradually eroding the capabilities of his armed forces.